Several years ago, a former boss posed a question to me. He said, "Why is it that you always insist on taking the long road, the path of most resistance to get to where you're going?" And the question really struck me because I've never really thought about it before, but the truth is, I've always been much more comfortable swimming against the current than swimming with it. So when I met the RiNo folks a few years ago, I was struck. This place is like a magnet for upstream swimmers. The status quo is absolutely not accepted here. This place is rough and urban and gritty, and the people have wild ideas, and lightning totally struck for me. If it's possible to fall in love with the whole place, I did. My love affair with RiNo, and with cities for that matter, is a pretty unusual one, given my personal origins. I am a small-town Iowa farm girl. I was born in a little place called Leland, in a town of 250 people, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And I had a pretty simple, straightforward life. I was quiet, I was shy, I was a homebody. And so sometime around the age of 16, I got this wild hair that I needed to get out of town, and I wanted to become an exchange student. And so my family put me on a plane to Finland. And I landed in this big city, having never traveled very far at all from Leland, and in a culture I knew nothing about, with a family I knew nothing about, and my eyes were wide open going into the experience. But it didn't take me very long to go from being a small-town Iowa farm girl to becoming a big city kid, and I was absolutely in love with the architecture and the art and the markets and the shops and the people and all the interesting things I learned while I was living abroad. And what's interesting is that this completely changed the lens through which I would view life forever after. And this had definitely not been my experience with cities growing up in the US. When I was a kid, if we would go to visit a city, we would go there with a very specific purpose in mind, and then we would get the heck out of there before dark. We did not go to cities to have fun family time or to explore or to see all the great things, because that's what lovely little Leland, Iowa was for. And to that point, the last half of the century in America was not our best as it comes to cities. About halfway through the century, we started completely abandoning them. We built big roads, and we built big malls, and we completely destroyed our urban fabric, and we took apart our urban neighborhoods as well. And something called urban renewal started to take hold, and places as near and dear to us as downtown Denver were almost completely flattened so that government and developers could start fresh, history and roots be damned. And almost every city across the US thought this would be a way to cure urban ills and build healthier communities. But the truth is, what really happened is that when we turned our back on our cities, we turned our backs on each other too. And we started spending more time in cars and less time together, and we let our history and our culture and the context which held us together be ripped apart as well. And it was really ripped apart by this groupthink mentality that led city planners to believe that what was good for one place would be good for every place. And back then, there were very few people fighting against that, or people who really even knew how to fight against that. Mostly, we let government and development shape our lives for better or for worse. And then it was sometime around the 1980s when people started to realize that destroying our cities, our downtowns, our urban core was making things a whole lot worse. It wasn't solving any problems, it was creating new ones. And so communities and people went to their government and they asked for help. And it was the first time the private sector and the public sector were truly working together to try to figure out solutions. And there were new types of partnerships born, and there were new tools created to do this. But the big question was how? How would the urban fabric be reknitted back together? And how would we rebuild the places that we'd completely torn apart and bring back that sense of community and that sense of place? And how would government learn to do something differently? And how would the private sector actually be able to influence it all? So sometime in the late 90s, after I graduated college, I was actually working as a TV reporter in Iowa, and I was assigned to cover community development stories in local government. And I was covering a massive downtown redevelopment project in a big Iowa city that was being proposed by the government. And they were selling this big, slick vision, big pictures of shiny new casinos and a water park and hotels and all these great things on the riverfront in this struggling Iowa city. And they were also selling a multi-million-dollar price tag that had to go to the voters, and the vote failed. And the government seemed shocked by this. Like, why wouldn't people want that? But from my seat as a spectator, I saw why, because I'd been covering the story. And you had downtown small businesses that were barely succeeding, and vacant buildings, and basically a downtown that people really didn't care about coming to anymore. And this wasn't really solving all of those issues. And so what I found was that the stakeholders, the people who invested, the community, really wanted a voice, and they didn't have one. And much to my surprise, eventually they would turn to me to find that. And so at age 26, I was hired to run the downtown development agency, redevelopment agency, a public-private partnership that had been formed to try to address some of these issues. And I had no idea what the hell I was doing, because I was a small-town farm girl. I'd not lived in a city. I'd not been trained in urban planning. And I had no business being there, really. But that all probably was very helpful to me in what I was doing, because simply by virtue of my naivete, innovation and creative problem solving, creative thinking would be both my fallback and my strategy for success there. And to me, it seemed very simple. Talk to people, build partnerships, find good ideas to solve problems, and then do one better. Break the rules, don't take no for an answer. And that's what we did. And for about 4 years, me and that city working together had some tremendous successes, which were absolutely great and really set the tone for redevelopment there, for revitalization. But the most important thing to me was that experience as still a kid really taught me and has informed and shaped everything that I've done since. So for the last 15 years, I've been blessed to work locally and globally, helping people, the people in cities, the people in places, curate, create, dream, envision, make things happen in their cities, the cities that belong to them, that are part of them. And at each place that I've worked, the context has been a little bit different, depending on where you are. But the way that it has been approached generally has to be the same. And the first step in all of this is to understand who the participants are in the process, because there are several different groups. There are these status quo thinkers that you're going to run up against everywhere. Sometimes they're in the government, yes. Sometimes they're just in the general community. But they're people that, for whatever reason, they just can't seem to think about things in a different way. Maybe they don't know how, maybe they don't want to. Whatever the case is, they're stuck right here. And then you get visionaries who want to build these tremendous, amazing, dreamy things and have no clue how to get there. You have people invested for reasons of self-interest in the project, and then you have people who are so passionate about community they can hardly contain themselves. And the important thing to note is that it takes all of these people together to make the magic happen. The biggest trick, the biggest challenge in all of this is untangling all their goals and hopes and motivations and desires, finding the common thread, and then meaningfully knitting it back together. And for the last 15 years, that's been my job, or as some have said, I serve as an urban therapist to cities. And there are 3 things I can share with you about that work and about that process as kind of a takeaway from my experience that you can take with you too. Number 1, if you are looking to help your neighborhood or your community, your district, your city, whatever the case may be, the most important place to start is to know your storyline and be authentic to that. Knowing your storyline is so much more important than a big, shiny vision. That becomes your platform for everything you do. It becomes the way you form policy and shape programs. It becomes your stake in your ground to tell people what your values are and what you will and will not accept as a community. And so everything comes back to that. Number 2 everybody, and I mean absolutely everybody, has to be at the table working together. So the public and private sector have to be communicating, even as policy is going to be informed. But even more importantly, people within a community or a city have to be at the table together as well and talking to each other. And one of the things we like to talk about here in RiNo that we feel has led to our success to date is that we brag about the fact that we feel like our developers speak artists and our artists speak developers. They've learned over time to communicate in a unique language, and we invite everybody to the table for absolutely every conversation, even if they are painful. And we hope that that means that everybody sees kind of the impact of their decisions, and it leads them to make better ones. And then the third thing is that you should know that if it isn't uncomfortable, if it doesn't hurt, if it doesn't feel painful, if it doesn't make you itchy, then you're not doing something right. Because the best, most beautiful, most wonderful outcomes have been the hardest. And there have been probably tears and a lot of sweat and tons of no's and people telling us around every corner it's never been done that way and don't expect it ever will be done that way. And yet we found a way to do it. So it should feel uncomfortable. And the closer you get to that uncomfortableness, the closer you are to a breakthrough. So, you know, it sounds simple enough, but of course it never really is, because pushing back on old mandates and old policies and old ways of doing things and old thinking and status quo thinkers, it's all extremely hard work. It's exhausting work. And building from the ground up takes tremendous perseverance. And building partnerships takes tremendous amounts of patience. And it is a long, long road. But there is magic to be made when we all learn to play together in the same sandbox. I have seen it in my work all over the world. And you can see it happening right here in RiNo with all the great stuff that's going on. This neighborhood has proved it has the capacity to work together and to push from industrial, gritty, urban roots, a place that was forgotten, to a place that artists discover and then developers discover. And there's a recession and there's a recovery and then investment, investment, investment. And a fear of change and a fear of gentrification and headlines and storylines about artists fleeing and developers pushing each other to be much better. And it's a neighborhood stuck between a storyline and change that makes it look like every place else, or a neighborhood that looks like something special, like something that is uniquely RiNo. It's a perfect storyline in a perfect moment, a true testament to what happens when you collaborate and innovate and push all along the way. So thank you so much for participating in RiNo's journey, also for letting me share my journey as well. Thank you.